Hello, everyone. This is Scott Latchett, President of Research and Strategy here at PSFK, and I am joined by my colleague Penn Whailing, who is a senior strategist on my team, and we are both excited to be sharing the findings from our latest debrief, which is on shopper data, leveraging in-store analytics to create a two-way value exchange between retailer, brand, and consumer. But before we get there, I wanted to just take a minute and remind you all what we do here at PSFK. We are a retail and CX innovation platform. We have daily newsletters. We publish reports like this debrief that we'll be sharing with you on a monthly basis. For our premium members, we offer a Chatter Researcher service, which is bespoke research, client bespoke reports. Couple events worth mentioning while we have you here. We have a live event where we'll be presenting the findings from our auto debrief on April 18th. So that's this week. And then we also will have our store design debrief on May 9th coming up. And then following that, on June 19th, we will actually be sharing these findings live from the shopper data debrief on June 19th. All those events are going to be happening in New York City. As always, if you're interested in learning more about the services that we offer, feel free to reach out to our colleague, Jeff Weiner. He will be more than happy to talk to you about what we offer, associated costs, and all that other good stuff. But with all that said, we will jump right into the report and share some of those findings with you. As mentioned, this is the shopper data debrief. Really what we're looking at here is really that sort of in-store analytics piece and that sort of two-way exchange that we see happening between retailers and brands. What we're actually seeing is that now with new technologies, there's a whole host of ways that stores can be activated and provide both value to the store in terms of who's coming in, what activities they're doing within the context of that store, optimizing inventory, making decisions about new product design, etc. And then that translates ultimately back into a better CX experience for customers. So everything from personalization to recommendation and everything in between. And I think that's really what's important here is for too long, the sort of equation that's been happening within the context of data has been retailers or brands taking that information and not necessarily delivering anything valuable in return. More and more as we get into this, what we'll see is that consumers really demand that sort of value exchange. And so as we take you through what we're calling these guiding pillars, we'll start to see the ways that both retailers, brands, and customers can begin to benefit from this new relationship.
So first, we wanted to walk you through some of the new consumer desires that we're seeing. And really, there's this conflict between, this desire for increased personalization versus privacy. And today's consumers, due to news about data breaches and things like that, consumers really have growing concerns about their personal data and how it's being collected and used. So they're seeking more control. They want to know what data is being collected and how it's being used, and they're really seeking to opt in versus, having brands and retailers collect their data without their knowledge. And that being said, they're willing to share their personal data in exchange for a better experience. As Scott mentioned, it's no longer brands just collecting their data and consumers not getting anything in return. They really want it to be a two-way street where they get clear value in exchange for sharing this data. And, they increasingly expect the offline shopping experience to be as personalized and responsive as the online one. And as brands and retailers increasingly have access to all of this data about the consumers, they still expect to be treated as a fully realized individual and instead of a collection of their demographic data. So they really want brands to treat them as people versus the sum of their demographic and behavioral data. And lastly, consumers expect brands and retailers to take all of this data and use it to understand and even anticipate their needs, whether that is developing new products based on their current desires or refining the store experience and inventory and merchandising.
now that we've looked at what the consumer is expecting within the context of that broader data conversation, we can take a step back and see where retailers are within that journey. Obviously, many of you out there are at brands and retailers, and depending on where you are in that journey, we're here to tell you that the industry as a whole is sort of struggling to catch up with the new demands that are taking shape. And we'll just kind of highlight some of the things that we're seeing within the space. So the first thing is, going directly back to what Penn just spoke about, is that sort of juggling those conflicting consumer desires between privacy, value, personalization, etc. It's a real challenge, and it's a fine line for brands to, really sort of understand what the right way is to approach this. I think from our point of view, and as we'll see as we go through, giving consumers the ability to opt in, understand what's happening within the context of their data, how it's being used, providing value, and ultimately being transparent really help to solve those challenges. But it's constantly going to be something that is going to be an issue that brands and retailers are going to have to deal with. Secondly, and this is, something that I think we're seeing much more broadly with a lot of the sort of big scandals that are happening, the regulation that's stepping in on some of the big platforms, the FANGs, if you will, that there's a whole new series of regulations that are being put forth by governments sort of across the board, and that ultimately will be something that you're going to have to contend with. I think one of the sort of interesting assumptions that maybe a lot of companies have is that they're just going to have more and more access to more and more customer data. But ultimately, what we're seeing is that there's going to be, some pushback, and likely that landscape is going to change, which makes that sort of value piece so critical. Providing something that consumers are going to want to opt into and participate in, so that you can have access to that information and then ultimately use it to better your business and improve their experience. As we think about that transition from the sort of digital landscape into the physical one, it certainly has been a challenge. There is a whole host of new technologies that are required, that sort of underlying infrastructure to enable a store or a brand to actually collect the information about the way shoppers are interacting within a physical space. And so certainly there's going to be growing pains there, and the return on investment is going to be more of a long tail that we're seeing. And so, one of the things that I think we're trying to do just as a sort of business is help sort of connect the dots back to some of these providers of these solutions as well. But I'll sort of put a pin on that for now. But, needless to say, the sort of activating a physical store and actually turning it into something that's going to be able to gather the right amount of information from how people are activating within that store is something that's still continuing to evolve. And then once you have that information, really the challenge is then trying to figure out how you actually translate that into some sort of a physical experience. As we walk you through, we'll start to see that certainly there's an opportunity within the mobile sort of activation within a store, which is perhaps a little bit easier to do versus having in-store technologies, displays, etc., begin to respond to a customer in a more personalized manner, and then how that information sort of flows through to frontline staff, etc. There's all different ways that can sort of be combined to deliver a personalized experience. And I think, again, it sort of gets back to who is your customer, what's really going to ultimately deliver something of value and something of use for them as they go through that shopping experience, and then how do you make that feel more personal to them. And then from an organizational point of view, I think this is something that we've been talking about for a number of years now. There are these data silos that exist, and this is just something that is sort of systematic within a number of the brands and retailers and companies that we speak to, particularly as you think about the sort of shift from these sort of siloed approaches to retail. You had your mobile team, you had your online team, you had your bricks and mortar team, let's say, and they were capturing disparate data about customers, about sort of stores, etc. and then none of that information was being shared across the organization. And ultimately, what we're seeing is that the ability to sort of take all of that information and synthesize that, whether that's understanding consumer holistically across all of the different touch points within sort of shopper journey, or understanding sort of sales across a network of stores. It's critical to have that sort of bigger picture point of view, and there's a lot more that you can start to activate on once you have access to that as well. And then finally, there's that sort of distribution challenge. So I think, and alongside of that, there is the sort of decision to again, sort of what is the information that we're collecting? What are the things that we can actually do with it to improve our operations? Is it to understand foot traffic? Is it to optimize the sort of store layout and design? Is it to make sure that we have the right inventory available at any given point in time? Is it to improve our sort of ability to personalize the experience for customers? These are all different ways that this data can be used. And again, that requires the ability to sort of have the analytics in place, whether through AI, machine learning, et cetera, and sort of turn that into actionable insights. But then to my point about distribution, it's making sure that you're actually getting that information into the hands of the people that can do something with it. And that sort of top down, bottom up, sort of across the organization. It's as important to make sure that someone in the C-suite is able to make those sort of broader decisions as much as it is to have a store manager or someone within the supply chain have access so that they're able to sort of react and be much more responsive to use that data in a powerful way. I won't dwell on this slide too much, but this gives you a sense of our sort of a broader approach, our framework for thinking about shopper data. Typically we talk about trends. In this context, we felt that there was something slightly different happening here. And so we're calling these levers. And really the way that we have approached this is these are loosely organized around the shopper journey. So from that sort of awareness discovery, but ultimately a shopper walking into your store through the different touch points that they might interact with as they're going through that shopping experience, ultimately to that sort of post-purchase path. Within the report, you'll see that we've broken these up in a couple different ways. One is the sort of participation level from the shopper itself. Is it active? Is it passive? The type of data that's being collected. In some cases, it's individual. In some cases, it's more sort of collected and aggregated feedback from across the shoppers and consumers that you're interacting with. And then the third is sort of thinking about this from the standpoint of that CX. Is the benefit directly available almost in real time, or are shoppers sort of seeing that through the long tail? Is it ultimately something that's a little bit more behind the scenes that they might not be aware of, but ultimately is making that shopping experience much more robust and sort of exceptional for them? So as we go through with these 6 levers, what we'll do is we'll just sort of talk about what we're seeing within the context of the space, how this is actually sort of happening, what the value is for both brands, retailers, and their shoppers, and then share a best-in-class example with you from the marketplace. So that first piece that we're going to talk about is what we're calling mobile activation. As we've seen within the broader landscape, mobile is a super powerful tool that consumers are just sort of using on a daily basis for everything. As we start to think about what role that plays within the retail space, certainly we're seeing the rise of mobile shopping just sort of take off across the board. But then as we see that sort of blurring between the on and offline experience, mobile becomes a super powerful tool for consumers to use within that physical store environment. A couple of things that are happening here is perhaps a couple of years ago, we would have talked about how a mobile device could just be seamlessly activated within the context of the store environment and start to deliver personalized messaging or information within the context of the store. What we're seeing now is it's much more of an opt-in experience. Consumers might have the app on their phone, but depending on how they want to shop and what experience they're looking for, they might not want to activate it. So you're giving them that choice to sort of check into your physical store. Once that happens, then it becomes a really powerful tool that can then bring the store to life in different ways. I think what we've seen is that beyond delivering personalized information within the context of the mobile device and serving that up to consumers sort of in context, we can see ways that they can begin to interact with the store, get things delivered to a dressing room, start to have sort of control over that environment and sort of personalize that experience to them. But then ultimately, the mobile device acts as a powerful sort of unifying CRM tool within that context, and becomes that sort of syncing between all the different activity that's happening. And then obviously within the context of, if you're a company, you're getting first level sort of information about individual consumers that you can then leverage in a bunch of different ways.
Okay. And an interesting example of this is the MAC Cosmetics Experience Center in Shanghai, which is a concept store that aims to bridge that gap between the digital and the physical experience. So upon entering the store, shoppers can choose to check in via a WeChat mini program, which is a lightweight app that runs inside the main WeChat app. And they're greeted with a personalized greeting, and then they can use this WeChat mini program as an access point to unlock a variety of exclusive services and tools within the store experience. So they can use the app to do things like check out instantly or even order food to be delivered to them while they're shopping in the store. And the store itself was designed to appeal to Gen Z, and it actually used data to design the store based on exit interviews and focus groups with Gen Z consumers.
I think what's super interesting here is, when we look at the China marketplace, is they're much more advanced in terms of their use of mobile, but really where they sort of excel is the use of mobile payments. So you have these sort of bigger players, Tencent, Alibaba, etc., who have created these sort of ecosystems within which a consumer can do a number of different things, including paying. As Penn mentioned, once you're in the store, you've sort of ultimately, you're in the WeChat sort of universe, and then you can leverage that to do a number of things, both within the context of the store itself, but then within the broader ecosystem. So you're able to sort of deliver a lot of new experiences. And by having that sort of payments piece, this is something we sort of continually try to trumpet here, is you're able to then sort of take that payments experience and then easily translate that into a sort of loyalty play. And because they have these sort of ecosystems that are ultimately being leveraged by these stores, you are not requiring a consumer to download a brand new app and then go through that sort of onboarding process, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a much more sort of powerful and seamless experience. Certainly, we've seen within the US market, perhaps one of the most standout examples is the new Nike store, which is in New York and Shanghai currently, where their mobile app experience is something that brings the store to life in new ways. But Nike's had to do a lot of back-end work to make that a compelling enough experience for consumers to want to sort of engage with on a sort of regular basis to sort of build up that data piece, let's say. So anyways, I think there's an interesting sort of thing that's happening here, and at least in the near term, it feels like that the experience is much more of a easy sort of transition for brands playing within the China market. The second piece that we want to talk on is really this idea of what we're calling visual recommendation. And ultimately what this is doing is this is leveraging different types of computer vision technology within the context of the store, whether that's AI or, sort of straight up visual recognition technology, to create more tailored recommendations to consumers. So ostensibly what you have here is things like AR virtual try-on stations, something we're seeing happening a lot within fashion and beauty. You give customers the ability to try on a shade or a virtual piece of clothing without having to go through the actual physical process. And then based on some of the scanning and the information that's being gleaned from these from these back end sort of recommendation systems. They're able to use that to create recommendations for consumers that are tailored to them. What ultimately then is happening is these brands and retailers are getting a lot of firsthand information about what ultimately is interesting to consumers. What are the things that they're trying on and buying? What are the things that they're potentially leaving behind? All of that ultimately is, valuable information that can then be used to improve operations, think about inventory, think about the types of products that are being offered within the broader ecosystem. And really, that lever again is providing a recommendation based on what you understand about that consumer in the moment.
As Scott mentioned, we're seeing a lot of this AR visual recognition stuff happening within the beauty and fashion space. And an example of this is UCAM for Business, which has created a suite of services for retailers. And their UCAM for Business app consists of an in-store mirror that uses AR to let shoppers virtually try on makeup and hair colors and experiment with over 100 different products, making it easy to try on different looks. And it uses AI-powered features to analyze their appearance and their individual characteristics, like their hair and skin color, to provide personalized recommendations. And at the same time, the app includes a fully integrated content management system that makes it easy for retailers to analyze the type of data that it collects about product trial and engagement, as well as demographic data. So it's really providing this convenient interface for retailers to leverage this data that they're collecting.
The next lever that we want to talk about is what we're calling contextual triggering. And this is really sort of taking that recommendation piece a step further, less about the individual consumer, but more about what the consumer is interacting with within the context of the store. So ultimately what we're seeing here is this is being driven by sensor technology like RFID, where consumers walk into a dressing room, let's say, they have an article of clothing with them that they're trying on. The interactive mirror within the dressing room is able to understand what is in the dressing room at that moment with the consumer. Based off of that information, they can then recommend additional products, accessories, and things of that nature that the consumer might additionally like to purchase alongside that particular item. Great opportunity for upsell, but then obviously, one of the things again that we're seeing is that it's providing real-time information about what products are being interacted with within the context of the retail environment. Based off of that, there's a lot of decisions that can be made by a retailer and brand to optimize that product mix, etc.
An example of this is Apricart, which is a grocery cart that has a built-in camera system so it can scan items automatically as shoppers add them to their cart. And this allows them to pay instantly, skipping the checkout line, and it also can direct them to items within the stores and remember their frequently purchased items, as well as provide them with personalized recommendations and special offers based on the items that they add to their cart. So say you add a box of spaghetti, then it could say, oh, here's a special offer for pasta sauce or something like that. So really providing a personalized, more convenient experience for shoppers. And at the same time, it provides grocery retailers with the opportunity to collect in-moment data about the shopper's path to purchase and the items that they add to the store, and as well as test the effectiveness of the personalized promotions that they provide to shoppers and receive immediate feedback on their effectiveness.
And you can imagine that, something like this, which is already, theoretically a sophisticated system, if everything is working properly, so many, or if not all grocery stores have some level of a loyalty program. And so you begin to see how a customer could log in or tap their loyalty card or whatever the case might be. And then you can even sort of get that much more granular data about individual consumers, which you can then use, as Penn mentioned, sort of in real time through that sort of system to provide promotions, etc. But then you can also think about that aggregated as well and what that ultimately can mean for a business thinking about its operations as a whole.
And now we're just going to show you a brief video about how Apricot works.
When it comes to understanding grocery purchasing behavior, traditional methods paint an incomplete picture. What if there were a way to collect better, more complete grocery data in real time while improving the customer experience? Introducing Apricot, a smart grocery cart that helps shoppers, marketers, and grocery stores. Apricot uses patent-pending machine vision to collect never-before-available shopper behavior data in real time to provide unprecedented insights to consumer packaged goods marketers. Apricot uses a touchscreen interface to influence shopper behavior at the decision point, with helpful information customized dynamically. Shoppers are inspired by recipes, meal plans, and nutrition information. And the best part is last. Shoppers pay on the cart and just walk out. For grocery retailers, Apricot improves customer experience by reducing lines, lowering costs, and increasing sales through understanding the path to purchase. Everyone wins with Apricot. Shoppers, marketers, and retailers. Apricot, the future of shopping.
As we've taken you through the first three levers, we've really seen that sort of individual level of data that's being offered. And for the most part, the benefit to shoppers has been very direct in the moment, ultimately. As we sort of transition to the final three, what we're going to see is this is, really, again, thinking about that sort of long tail. A consumer might not ultimately see the benefit directly, but over time, if this information is leveraged correctly, then the experience is just going to be, sort of optimized and improved over time for them. So to that point, the next lever that we want to talk about is what we're calling behavioral heat mapping. And this is really sort of thinking about shopper behavior within the context of the store on a much more sort of aggregated level. This is perhaps one of the more sort of most utilized pieces of technology that brands and retailers have available to them. Essentially, understanding and tracking how people are moving throughout that store environment, understanding time of day, dwell time in front of different displays, all those different things, which then can be analyzed and used to improve things like store layout, the pricing of particular items, thinking about merchandising decisions, as well as sort of inventory management at a much more sort of aggregated level as well. And again, this is anonymized shopper data. It's a much more passive relationship that's sort of happening here, but then ultimately using those insights to then improve the way that a store is functioning or the supply chain that sort of ultimately serves it.
As Scott mentioned earlier, we're really seeing retailers in China pulling ahead in terms of being able to collect data in store as part of their overall new retail strategy to kind of blur the line between online and offline retail. And one company we see doing this is Chinese e-commerce company JD, which has opened a lot of cashierless, fully automated convenience stores throughout China, and they recently opened one in Indonesia as well. And these stores use sophisticated technology to study shoppers' movements. So items contain RFID, and so they can track the items, and cameras are placed throughout the store to track shoppers' movements throughout the store, generating heat maps that allow them to monitor traffic and refine the product selection and merchandising to help optimize the inventory and displays. And finally, they're using facial recognition technology to identify shoppers as they leave, eliminating the need for checkouts and automatically charging their credit card for any items that they take. So really, we're seeing Chinese retailers, things that are kind of novelties here are already established way of life in China.
One other thing that I think is worth mentioning within the context of this trend, or lever, let's say, but then sort of overall across the context of this report, is I think in the same way we talked about breaking down silos within the context of an organization, I think the same thing holds true for the types of data that you're collecting. Obviously, as you can see within this example, they're not only leveraging heat mapping technology, but all the different information that they're collecting about shoppers in a much more aggregated context. So, in the best use cases, the way that this data is being collected and then ultimately utilized within the store environment, sort of cuts across a lot of the things that we're talking about. So I think no singular piece of data is going to sort of unlock the great sort of, hidden insight for a company. But when you start to sort of combine that in different ways and then ultimately have a strategy about how you best want to utilize that, then it really begins to create a transformational experience. While we've been focusing a lot specifically within the context of in-store, we felt like it was important to also think about just more broadly how information captured across channels can ultimately be used in a way to improve the experience across all of a retailer's touch points. And certainly, sales information is something that we're really seeing begin to explode, particularly as you think about linking that across channels. And this both works on an individual, but most effectively on a sort of aggregated basis when you see the activities that are happening. Let's say consumer starts their journey researching online and then ultimately ends up making that purchase decision within the context of a physical store, or vice versa. They come in, check out a couple products, test them out in real life, and then ultimately decide to place that final purchase on mobile. Being able to link all that information together is powerful in terms of thinking about the metrics and the ROI between and the interplay between all of these different platforms. But then also, again, sort of thinking about this from a in-store experience, starting to see, what products are being purchased where, starting to sort of think about localizing the inventory, having that much more responsive to a particular, down to a store level so that you're never running out of product. You always have the ability to serve a customer's needs within a particular store or particular locality, and ultimately just makes that sort of supply chain piece much more responsive and anticipatory.
And for this lever, we have another example from China with Fresh Hippo, the chain of grocery stores owned by Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba. And they're using data analysis in order to maximize their inventory, to reduce waste, and ensure that shoppers have access to the freshest possible produce in a process that they're calling one-day farm to table. So by analyzing the purchase data from digital orders, they're able to determine what items to stock each day. So they're ordering only the amount that they need, so there are no unsold goods to be thrown away at the end of the day. And shoppers are also able to gain more information about the items by scanning a QR code and getting information about each item's farm to store journey. And this provides an assurance about the item's origin as well as its freshness.
As we close out with the sixth lever, what you'll see is that we've gone through that shopper journey, obviously thinking about going through that process of interacting within the context of the store environment. With number 5, we looked at that sort of transactional moment. And now with the sixth lever, what we're calling opportunity assessment, we're really sort of looking at that sort of post-purchase, let's call it sort of R&D opportunity that exists for brands and retailers. Ultimately, this is sort of two-pronged. It's both looking at direct consumer feedback that they're sharing about their purchases, the products that they've bought, as well as thinking about it from a more quantitative point of view, social sentiment analysis, analyzing product reviews, etc., and looking for potential white space opportunities or unmet needs within that, and then ultimately funneling that back into the R&D process to determine new products or services that will meet the needs of consumers, both being much more responsive in terms of the innovation that is happening within an organization, having it much more informed so that when a new product comes to market, that the likelihood of it being successful is increased. Think of a company like Stitch Fix that has been known for its sort of data-driven efforts within this space. They're doing a really nice job of taking all that information and translating that directly into new products. But there's across the board a lot of different companies that are really sort of closing that gap here and seeing new opportunities as a result.
And an example of a company who's using data in order to develop new products is clothing rental platform Rent the Runway, which recently launched a clothing line developed by the data that they've generated from years of consumer feedback. So through post-rental surveys about fit and style preferences, Rent the Runway was able to combine different data points about things like the wear rate, where items were worn, fit and style preferences, such as different types of hemlines, sleeve length, and more. And then taking all of this insight and empowering their designers to create a clothing line based on this data. And the line will be able to continually use new data from the consumers in order to continue to refine the line and offer new products based on consumers' real-time preferences.
I think it's interesting to think about a company like Rent the Runway and the relationship that they have with consumers. Obviously, active users are tapping into the service on a regular basis, and they've constructed the business model in a way that they're continually generating feedback on things like fit, but as well as getting information back from their consumers about the types of products that they've used in the past, and they're funneling that all directly into their R&D process. And so, again, sort of over time, creating new styles that are ultimately going to be something that consumers are going to want to rent and wear. And so, and which sort of brings that back to giving them something that they're going to want to sort of interact with and engage with more. So I think it's something that needs to be baked into the way that you're thinking about that sort of full cycle of consumer interaction. And again, the thing that we always stress is that while it's important to obviously get to that sort of transactional moment, there's a lot of work that needs to happen still within that sort of post-purchase space. So just a quick reminder of the 6 levers that we spoke about today. Again, sort of thinking about moving through that initial entry point into the context of the store and all the different experiences that can be offered and the types of data that you're capturing along the way, and then ultimately bringing that back through purchase into that post-purchase environment. I think it's worth mentioning that within the context of this report, some of the things that we share in addition to what we've spoken about today is some of the key technologies that are being leveraged within each of these particular levers, the types of data that are being collected in a much more sort of granular way. But as we close out the presentation, as we always like to do, we're going to just share a couple key takeaways with you as we think about some of the best practices that sort of cut across the work that we've shared today. And that first one is, very straightforward. Again, is sort of giving consumers transparency and oversight into your data policies. It's becoming table stakes nowadays with all of the challenges that have happened sort of across the board. It's important for consumers to understand what it is they're sharing with companies, making sure that anything that's collected that isn't directly tied to an individual is going to be anonymized, and then ultimately, where possible, giving consumers control into the types of data that are ultimately being shared with companies.
And next, it's important to keep in mind that data collection should be a two-way street. Consumers, as we mentioned, are willing to share some of their personal data, but they want to know that they're getting something in exchange. So keep in mind when you're collecting data, make sure that it enhances, not detracts from the shopper experience. So the ways in which you collect it should be unobtrusive and should offer a clear benefit, whether that's faster service or hyper-personalized recommendations in the store, in order to make that in-store experience more dynamic and responsive.
Then I think we see this as this next sort of best practice as sort of a holy grail in some ways, is understanding your customer across platforms. And really, this has been a focus of a lot of the innovative brands and companies that we've been tracking, is to really put an effort into creating a unified CRM system, breaking down the silos within their organization, providing the ability to understand an individual consumer across all of the various touch points, aggregate that information and deliver on that a personalized manner.
And lastly, it's important to have a plan in place for how you're going to leverage all of the data that you collect. And as Scott mentioned earlier, it's important to break down silos within your organization and ensure that relevant parties at all levels, from the C-suite to the store associates, are able to access the data that they need, as well as empowered to use this data, whether that's refining merchandising or refining operations.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. We're excited for you all to access the full report. And while we no longer are doing questions as part of these webinars, we would love for you to share your feedback or get in touch if there's additional things that you want to learn about. As always, our colleague Jeff Weiner is happy to take your questions, whether about this particular report or any of the services that we offer. Look forward to sharing our latest and greatest with you each and every month. And thanks all again for joining us today.